we can go right ahead and go into talking about some of the league's most underrated players in the NBA. Now, I should note that this is a list and it was taken from the last, like, I'm talking about the last 5 years. So a player like Paolo Banchero isn't going to be on this list because, while he is incredibly underrated and I think he is the most underrated player in the entire NBA, he wasn't in the league within the span of 5 years. He only played in the league for 2 years, and because of that, he can't make the list. So I just want to let people know why he's not on this list before I get into this list. It's talking about the last 5 years, and so Paolo Banchero can't be on this list, even though, yes, he is the most underrated player in the entire NBA. His playoff series was the least viewed playoff series once the playoffs even started, and part of that is because of when that game was scheduled. It was scheduled at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon about every single day, and over the weekends it's not that big of a deal, but over the weekdays when people are working and people are doing things, they can't always tune into the game, and that is one of the biggest reasons as to why that playoff series didn't really get that many views. So, first player on this list is Royce O'Neal for the Phoenix Suns. Now, he mainly makes this list because of his availability, and there's only been 2 players that can claim to have played more games than Royce O'Neal over the last 5 years, as he suited up for 374 games in that span, a figure bested by Buddy Hield, who played 388 games. Excuse me, allergies. And the only other player that played more games than both of those players was Mikal Bridges, who played 392 games. And Mikal Bridges, he's easily the best Iron Man in the entire NBA. He suits up for every single game. And in the time span of playing those 374 games, he's been able to shoot 38% from 3 in that sample, and he was also able to be pretty dominant for years as a full-time starter as with the Utah Jazz, and they finished 9th, 1st, and 3rd in point differential in 2019 to 2020, as well as 2021 and 2022. He's arguably one of the best 3-and-D players that the league has right now, and he just signed a 4-year, $42 million contract with the Phoenix Suns. And he's a pretty core contributor to the Phoenix Suns and their offense. And I know the main 3 players for Phoenix are Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal. But he really comes up when you really need somebody to perform that aside from either of those 3. When you need a role player to perform, he's there. Next player on this list is Mike Conley for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Ever since Mike Conley was on Memphis, he's been one of those underrated point guards in the NBA. A lot of people, the joke about Memphis that I had when Mike Conley and Marc Gasol as well was on the team was that the Memphis Grizzlies, they had the ability to beat everyone in the postseason and no one would be surprised. Yet they also had the ability to be one of the worst teams in the NBA and no one would be surprised. So that just shows you the roster that they had, and part of the reason being that is because Mike Conley, as good of a player that he is, he's not a player that really brings in a wow factor for your team. And while he was a number 1 or number 2 option for Memphis at the time, they weren't really doing much with him at that position. So Mike Conley has also been able to shed the label of best player never to make an All-Star game. That's really one of the big reasons as to why, he's not a number 1 option anymore. He's one of the best players in the NBA that never has made an All-Star game before. And like, that doesn't, like, obviously, that's good and bad, because it's like, there's the possibility that, oh, you don't make the All-Star team, you're not nearly as good as people say you are, but that's just not true. He's pretty underrated in all accounts. So he only made it as an injury replacement for Devin Booker, and Conley still gets too little credit for bringing professionalism and organized offensive leadership to a team success wherever he goes. And he's really, like, he's been that player that leads the team to, like, he makes a team a winning team, it seems like it. He was able to make 44% of his threes last season as well, and he has his on-off splits are littered with enormous positive differentials over the last 5 years. So if you're looking at, you want to see value, then there you go. The advanced stats show the value that he brings. Next player on this list is Ivica Zubac, arguably one of the more underrated players for the Clippers. And one of the things that I do want to note about Ivica Zubac is that whenever there is a good center on the court, 9 times out of 10 he plays very, very well. There was a time when Jokic, like, he would play Jokic, and I believe last season, Jokic had his most inefficient game when being guarded by Ivica Zubac. So take that what you will, but I think that's actually pretty crazy. If you give Nikola Jokic a pretty hard shooting night, then you must be really good on defense. And as a 19-year-old rookie in 2016-2017, he was able to, he found himself, surrounded by positionless wings and combo forwards masquerading as bigs, and everyone was scrambling to keep up with the Golden State Warriors' death lineup at the time, and the Houston Rockets' 5-out spacing, to the point that old school centers like Zubac seemed like they were going out of style. But then the Lakers traded for him at one point, and it only amounted to 17 games. But once he went to the Clippers, he's sort of been a really different beast. And he only shot below 61% from the field in, I believe it was one season. But in the last 5 years, he hasn't done that. And he's being a 7-footer, obviously it makes sense that you're going to be that efficient, but still, it's not an easy feat. Like, if that was so easy, we would see a lot of 7-foot centers be able to do what he's been able to do in the last 5 years, and be able to maintain that same level of consistency over that time. And next player on this list, again, we are running out of time, it's Kyle Anderson for the Golden State Warriors. He was for Minnesota last year, but then he got traded. And over the last 5 years, he's played 8,000 minutes and has been posting a block rate of 2.6% and a steal rate of 2.1%. He is a pretty competent two-way player. If, those numbers didn't really interest you, then, you really just have to watch him play. And his length combined with his speed and his feet, being 6'9", it's pretty surprising just how fast he actually is and how versatile of a defender he can be. And that's one of the big reasons why I think he's a little bit underrated. It's because he's a very versatile player and a versatile defender. And finally, the last player on this list who's underrated is Fred VanVleet for the Houston Rockets. Ever since he won his championship all the way back in Toronto, he hasn't really gotten that much attention from a lot of media outlets, and he was also, he's posted a league's 21st ranked in VORP total since 2019 and in 2020, which rates ahead of Devin Booker, Pascal Siakam, Drew Holiday, Paul George. He's the only player in the last 5 years to make at least 900 threes and get 500 steals, and Halliburton is the only other guy in that span to amass at least 2,000 assists with fewer than VanVleet's 652 turnovers. So his play has never dwindled whatsoever. It's just how much people talk about him that's been changing. So he's still a very competent player in this league, and he's a pretty decent option for the Houston Rockets, and I expect him to continue to be a decent option for Houston as his years with the Houston Rockets continue. But that's the end of the list. Those are some of the league's underrated players going into next season over the last 5 years. So let me know in the comments if I missed somebody, if you guys think that somebody else should have been on this list. But with that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and have a break and then go into the third segment where I talk about the SEC announcing its schedule. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that right after this short break. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.